Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Wyss, and I'm joined by Jonathan Fadugba. This is the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. Well, we're up and running in the respective leagues in Scandinavia. John, you must be loving it.
Greetings to everyone, and hello to you, Steve, my dear friend. Yes, we're back, and I can't deny I'm absolutely loving it. Firstly, wanted to say thanks to everyone who's followed us in the last sort of week or so. We've had a massive response to the first 3 episodes of the season. Follow count's growing, and we've had so much interaction from people. So big up to yourselves, and yeah, I'm really happy to be back and back for another show.
Yeah, thanks very much to all the new followers on at Nordic Foot Pod on Twitter. We're nearly at 1,000 followers, so big push this weekend. As many of you as you can get that's following out there, share all our tweets and everything like that. And actually, it's on Twitter, which is going to, start the first topic of conversation in this podcast, John, because we asked people, what do you want us to talk about in Sweden? And well, Sirius are top of the league, but obviously not as many wanted us to talk about them. Instead, it's down to Hammarby and a very controversial incident in their match at the weekend, which ended in a 1-1 draw against Kalmar. And tell us a bit more about this Hammarby controversy, John.
Yeah, I guess we had the poll on Twitter, and as Steve said, you can follow us there. And we asked people to vote for what we're going to talk about first. So unfortunately for you Sirius fans who are top of the league, we're not going to talk about you. We're going to talk about this controversy. I guess people love controversy, Steve? And yeah, it was an interesting game, to be fair. We covered it live at the time. It was Hammarby 1-1 draw with Kalmar. But it won't be remembered for the scoreline itself or the game, really. It will be remembered more for the crazy moment at the end where a goal was disallowed in the last minute, and it led to quite a big scandal, really, didn't it, Steve?
Yeah, I saw this posted around sort of Twitter later on in the day, and I watched the highlights of the match. And first things first, I think Hammarby should have won it, really. They were the better side in this game. But the goal itself, the none goal at the end, I have looked at this. Initially, I thought it was a shocking decision. I thought, bloody hell, they've got this miles wrong. He was well onside. I think the more you look at it, it gets closer, but he's got to be onside there, surely. That should be a legitimate goal, shouldn't it, John? That's my opinion anyway. Yeah,
at the time, it was very confusing, and even following it live online and everything, nobody seemed to know what was going on unless you were in the stadium. So for those who didn't see the game, the ball was played in, I think, by Sandberg at the end. It looked a very, very borderline cross. Last minute, obviously 1-1 at the time. Fans baying for blood. 31,000 in the stadium, the biggest attendance of the weekend. And Juric scored the goal, went off and celebrated, ripped off his shirt, ran away, and then it was disallowed, to the fury of Hammarby fans. Many of them who went to the right to the sidelines, they were literally kicking the advertising boards down, almost like they were going to get onto the pitch. There was a gap between the advertising boards, between the corner flag and the behind the goal, and many fans were literally could have, if they wanted to, just walked onto the pitch and ran onto the pitch. They were fuming. They were throwing things onto the field. I think there was a stoppage of at least 1 minute where the referee had to go around and pick up lighters and any kind of other paraphernalia thrown onto the field. And eventually, one of the players, Vladimir Rodic, ran onto the field right in the linesman's face and screaming at him, and was given a yellow card. There was just chaos everywhere. A fan ran onto the pitch. Obviously, Juric was booked, and to be honest, he was actually lucky not to be sent off after ripping off his shirt. And then, he got involved again, and a minute later, he could have gone for an elbow, in my opinion. The game just went crazy, really. Post-match, it's created quite a storm, actually, Steve, and there's been a lot of talk about it since.
Yeah, a very controversial incident, and obviously, the fans were going absolutely ballistic out there, weren't they? It looked like they were going to come on and kill the officials, and Hammarby, obviously the most supported club in terms of attendances in the whole Allsvenskan, aren't they? Overall, I do believe, stat off the top of my head, but. What's going to be the result of this, fallout then, John, do you think?
Well, for me, firstly, I'm really dubious as to whether it was offside. I can't really decide. At first, I thought it was clearly onside, and I thought Hammarby were very unlucky. But obviously, the more you see it, I mean, the linesman said he saw it again and he's happy with his decision. Other people have, claimed they're happy as well. The referee himself. I'm really unsure about whether it was onside or offside. I'm really not sure. But it's created two debates. Number one, it's quite an interesting one, really. It's about replays in stadiums. Should there be replays of 50-50 incidents in stadiums? Obviously, we don't have VAR in Sweden, and the debate there was obviously because the reason the fans went mental is because they played the replay. So they saw it on the big screen, and obviously that created the outrage. And the question is, should they really be showing that on the screens? There are actually protocols in place in Sweden about how many times you're allowed to show a replay, and there are guidelines in terms of what can be shown and when. You're not allowed to, for example, show commentary. You're not allowed to show it from a certain angle or any kind of markings, for example. So a replay was played, but it was obviously so borderline that it just really angered the fans. The second debate is obviously about Rodic, and I think it's an interesting one because in England, I think he would have been retrospectively banned by now, and I think he would be sitting out for a long time. His reaction was totally uncalled for, in my opinion. Don't forget, Steve, he was a substitute. So what business has he got running onto the pitch and confronting the linesman on the sidelines, from the dugout? I've no idea. I think it was bang out of order. He got in his face. The linesman came out afterwards and said, it wasn't what he said that made him get a booking. It was more his gestures. But for me, you shouldn't be anywhere near a linesman there. I think a yellow card was very, very lenient. I think in England he would have been sent off. And there's been calls for retrospective action against him because, his antagonising of the referee, of the linesman, really did not help that situation with the fans. And I think, there's been a fallout in that sense. And I think it's an interesting question, really, in terms of should he have gone. I think other players might have been sent off, and in England, he would have seen red for sure.
I'll tell you now, if that happened in MLS over in America and he did that to an official, you're not just getting sent off, you're getting banned for 3 or 4 games because they have zero tolerance over there.
Yes, it's really crazy how he was just given a yellow and kind of walk away. I was really surprised. It was a furious reaction, and I just thought it was really a real loss of control, really. I thought it was really quite poor, and he was lucky.
Just before we move on to, anything else, Hammarby, they've drawn their first 2 games to start the season. What have you made of them, John? And does their new signing, Kjartansson, impress you or not?
Well, no, he's not impressed so far. There's been a bit of a debate about him, actually, and the fact that he's not come out of the blocks flying. He's missed a couple of chances, actually. Hammarby, in terms of expected goals, are kind of quite near the top of the league, actually. So people, maybe you might say, if you pick the people who like to argue that these things even out, you would expect them to pick up soon and go higher. They've also had the best ball possession in the league, and as we mentioned, we're going to be using obviously Y-Scout's stats this season, and that's one of them, I suppose, from this episode. Hammarby have the best ball possession in the league. I think the game itself, they were slightly unlucky. Kalmar's goalkeeper saved the day, really. He was exceptional. He was man of the match performance. I think he made 3 or 4 saves. He was given bonus points in fantasy football, and he was very, very good on the day. Without him, I think they probably would have lost that game. So not the best of starts for Hammarby. Djurdjic, I think, like I say, should have been maybe sent off. Rodic should have been sent off. Kjartansson's not really come into it yet. Kosanu, who we called as one of our 10 to watch, has been okay, but it's been quite sloppy, actually. He was at fault, I think, for the goal, and just general, he looks like he'll need some time to adapt, but the raw attributes are there. But all in all, for Hammarby, not the best of starts, and they'll need to pick it up this weekend when they play against Helsingborg away.
Yeah, I saw you tweeting about the goalkeeper at Kalmar as one of the most underrated in the league, or along those lines. Obviously, want to keep an eye on there.
Yeah, there is a bit of a debate about him at the moment because he had such a good game. Lucas Hag Johansson, he's 24 years old. I think he is quite underrated, actually. He's been good for a while, and it's not really, as Kalmar tend to go under the radar, and I think he has gone under the radar slightly. I don't think that will last too long if he continues. Kalmar have a game this weekend against, I believe it is Norrköping, so that's a big game, especially with Norrköping not doing so well. And yeah, he'll be one to watch maybe for your fantasy team.
Okay, well, on the Twitter poll, it ended up level in terms of what percentage wanted us to talk about the Hammarby match, and also a lot of interest in Malmö at the minute, getting beaten by GIF Sundsvall 3-1 at the weekend, and they've yet to win a match yet, Malmö, just 1 point on the board, and 3-1 against GIF. I mean, talk to us about this match, John. Did it surprise you?
I keep saying it, and I'm going to say it again. I'm afraid you'll probably be a bit bored of hearing it if you're a regular listener, but I'm really impressed with GIF Sundsvall. I really like what I see from them, and I liked what I saw from them again this past weekend. They showed no kind of fear against Malmö. We've praised a lot of their players in the seasons gone by, players like Linus Hellenius and David Batanero, the Spaniard, who again was really good. I think one player that we need to mention in this podcast was Juanjo Ciacoles, another Spanish player. Played an exceptional through ball for the first goal, scored by Sema. A really good through ball that was finished off. It was a 3-1 win for GIF Sundsvall. Malmö equalised through Traustason from a corner, but literally straight up from the kickoff, a terrible mistake from the Malmö backline, Bent Bengtsson. And
wasn't it, that?
It was appalling, just straight back to Hellenius, who really, to be fair, he took it like a striker in form, rounded the keeper instantly, one touch bang, and into the net, 2-1, and then a penalty conceded by, I think it was Rosenborg, and Hellenius made no mistake to make it 3-1. So GIF Sundsvall, their rise continues. They've played Malmö at home now and Djurgården away, and they have 4 points, which is really, really impressive. Their form seems to continue, and there's no signs of a downer from them yet.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about Malmö, I think they've got a problem with penalties at the moment because they've missed two in 2 games. And it's funny, some teams have these periods where they have problems with penalty takers. I've had this conversation with a few Lyon fans this year. I think Lyon have missed more than 50% of their penalties awarded. And look, anyone can miss a penalty, anyone can score a penalty, but these have been crucial misses for Malmö, haven't they? I think both times it was 0-0 in the games, or sorry, 1-0 in the first week when they were leading. But it's cost them big, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, they have the highest expected goals in the league. So the question really there is: are they a bit unlucky, or is it simply a case of them missing big chances and like penalties, that kind of thing? I don't think the expected goals really reflected itself in the game against GIF Sundsvall. They didn't really. It wasn't the sort of game where, for example, they dominated it and they were lucky or unlucky to lose. I felt it was a deserved defeat, to be honest. Maybe you could argue that they, 3-1 was a bit harsh on them, but I didn't think that GIF Sundsvall were in any way sort of not good value for their win. I think with Malmö, it's kind of like what I said in the season preview podcast. I worry a little bit about them creativity-wise. I think they're very functional, but I don't think they're by any means kind of thrilling to watch or really highly entertaining in terms of individual quality. Romain Gall on the day was poor. Didn't really stake his place for his claim for a place in the side, having been given his chance. Uwe Rosler might not be too happy with him there. What else have they got? I mean, they had Molin, who I didn't really rate at all. He was poor, I thought. I'm not.
You did say this in the pre-season podcast, didn't you, about them? So it's not that much of a shock, I suppose.
Yeah, I just think they lack a little bit. That what I said in the pre-season podcast has come to fruition in the first 2 games, in my opinion. I just think they lack a little bit of spark. They've got good players. They are a good side in general, quite solid, and they've had a lot of problems with injuries, especially in the back, at the back of their defence. They're missing a lot of players in that sense. They had to play Oscar Levitsky in defence in that game, which didn't help. But they played Joe Ingeberget, your best friend there, and Molins, and just they took them off and brought on Rosenborg and Antonsson. But at no point did they really look like they were really going to hammer GIF Sundsvall. They didn't really look like they were that potent, and I worry about them going forward in that sense. They don't look to me the most potent team in the league, and I think that's something they need to work on maybe.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that Joe Ingeberget struggled. He hasn't looked very good for a good year or so now. Maybe he might get his mojo back. But you know, he's not the most confident striker, so it didn't surprise me in that regard. Let's just move on now to, well, I suppose we're going to have to talk a little bit about the side that are top of the table at the moment. 6 points for Sirius, and they beat AFC Eskilstuna at the weekend 3-2. I watched the highlights of this game, actually. I do actually have a couple of AFC Eskilstuna defenders in my fantasy team at the moment. They didn't score very well for me.
Who have you got?
I've got, I've forgotten what they're even called, to be honest. One of them's Felix, someone, I think. They did well for me in the first week. I think someone had an assist. But anyway, I watched the highlights of this game, and, well, I've got to be honest. I mean, you might know more than me here, but it looked like a flipping building construction yard, the Sirius Stadium. I mean, I did genuinely wonder if a new stand was being built, or it was just normally like that as anyway. But they got the 3-2 win. Have they been a bit lucky so far, John? And I mean, you didn't expect them to have a good year, so I presume you don't think it will continue.
Yeah, I mean, they're currently rubbing a giant custard cream egg all over my face after I predicted relegation and they're the top of the league. But we're 2 games in, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm pretty, you know, I'm not too worried about my prediction there still. I think they've had a pretty kind run so far. Kalmar away, Eskilstuna at home. One of the major talking points, I think, was more the fact that one of the goal scorers was ran off and shushed the Eskilstuna fans. He's a former Bromma player, and he claimed that AFC Eskilstuna disrespected Bromma in the playoffs, and he said he remembered it, was not happy at all. So yeah, he enjoyed that. But in general, I didn't, you know, I'm not massively up on Sirius. They've actually had the lowest ball possession in the league, 42.5%. Doesn't mean possessions by no means everything, but you know, I think they've done well to be top of the league, and they've scored some good goals. And I think the Kalmar win was a good win away from home, but certainly they have bigger tests to come. Starting with AIK away this weekend.
Yeah, it's as a good start for Sirius, and it's been, you know, AFC did have that win on the opening day as well for them, so a good start for promoted. It's actually been a fairly good start for the promoted teams. They've all had a victory each, and we're going to talk about one of them now, Falkenberg, and they had a very interesting match at Östersunds at the weekend, John, which I know well, me and you have had a bit of discussion about this game already, but what have you made? What did you make of that fixture, and what have you made of Falkenberg so far?
Well, this was a fascinating game, wasn't it? I mean, what a game in terms of you know, Charlie Colker's goal, Hossam Aish, really crazy goals, weren't they?
Some absolutely. I mean, the Östersunds goals, I think all of them are in the mixer for goal of the month contender, aren't they? Certainly the first 2 of them. I'm like, wow. But I mean, this was a bit of a wild game in the end. So many chances at either end, certainly in the last 10, 20 minutes. And yeah, ultimately a win for Östersunds. But I mean, Falkenberg have been perhaps surprisingly competitive in their 2 matches.
Well, I've got an interesting few stats on these 2 teams, actually, Steve. I'm going to get a bit statistical with you here, but Falkenberg have the 3rd lowest expected goals against in the league. So they're actually one of the best teams in the league in terms of expected goals against them. The only 2 teams who have been, you know, XG, for those who don't know, maybe. So this is the amount of goals you would expect against them based on chances created and that kind of thing, shots. So they're 3rd best in the league in that sense, behind Djurgården and AIK, who obviously haven't conceded a goal yet, AIK. And the other statistic is that they have the 2nd highest XG in the league. So after Malmö, it's Falkenberg. So that's really, really bodes well for the future, doesn't it? You know, close to the top of the league for you know, most parsimonious defence, and close to the top of the league for most expected goals. So despite their sort of results, they're looking okay if you base it on that. If you enjoy that baseline, you know, I don't look too much at the stats. I think they don't tell the full story, but that's indicative that maybe we should keep an eye on Falkenberg. Conversely, let's look at Östersunds, and there may be a bit of cause for concern for them because they have the number 1 expected goals against in the whole league, which means they're bottom of the league for the amount of goals you would expect against them, 4.94. But they've only conceded 2 goals. And on the other hand, they also have the 3rd bottom expected goals in the league with 1.41 goals. So despite those 3 goals against Falkenberg and their general form, they've only expected to have scored 1.41 goals this season. So maybe cause for concern there for Ostersund.
Yeah, in terms of statistics, obviously perhaps cause for concern going forward. But I suppose Ian Birchnell would say, right, well, we got a good point away at AIK. We beat Falkenberg, got the 3 points on the board. So in terms of points, yeah, they'll be pretty happy with how they're doing. But yeah, in terms of if you look deeper into these statistics, then it might be something that they need to work on their Ostersund. So let's see some other teams. I mean, IFK Göteborg, they've had 2 very mixed results so far, haven't they, John? They've beaten Elfsborg 3-0, but they had a really bad performance on the opening day. They lost against AFC. Yeah,
I'm still basking in the game against Elfsborg, to be honest. I thought they were really impressive. They played at Old Ullevi, which is the stadium just down the road from their actual stadium, due to issues with their pitch. I think the pitch wasn't deemed adequate to play on or something like that, so they had to play in a different stadium. And I've actually been to that stadium, and it was one of the biggest attendances in recent years in Sweden. IFK Malmö, first game of the 2017 season. So they played there again. It was an elevated attendance, and they just wiped the floor with Elfsborg, who I don't rate at all, as I've said before. But the star of the show on that day was Benjamin Nygren, and this is going to be a big story, Steve, I'm telling you, because I've been talking about this kid since a year ago, before he was even anywhere near the first team at IFK. He got a goal and 2 assists on the day. One thing I was surprised about, Steve, he's really filled out physically. He looks, he was a boy when I saw him play. He's starting to look like a man now. He was aggressive. He created some great goals. His weight of pass, when to pass, for both his assists was really, really good. He took his goal well. I'm really excited about this kid, Steve. I'm telling you, he's going to go places. From the point of view of Elfsborg, it was just a disaster. First goal was a shambolic mistake from I can't remember who it was now, but yeah, they were just poor. They had a man sent off. It was Gregerson actually, and he was also sent off. He was at fault for the first goal, and then he was eventually sent off. But yeah, I don't rate Elfsborg, as I've said, and I think IFK just kind of like dispatched them quite easily. But Benjamin Nygren is the big story there. IFK have got bigger tests to come, I think, so I can't judge them yet. But their fans are certainly happy, and in fact, one of their members of staff said that Benjamin has a contract for as long as he wants at this club. So there's already talk, his contract apparently is only till 2020, and now the debate is, can they keep him? So they've probably left it a bit late to renew that contract, because if he continues in this way, he won't be around for long.
Yeah, he was in your players to watch list at the start of the season, and at the moment he's living up to that billing handsomely, isn't he? So, yeah, Benjamin Nygren, is it Nygren or Nygren? Well worth watching out for. Just a question about that stadium, actually. Was that their old stadium that they used to play at, IFK?
Yeah, they used to play there.
Yeah, I remember it when I used to follow this league back in the day, like a decade or so ago, and Gamla Ullevi, yeah?
Yeah, it's very, it's not Gamla Ullevi, but it's called Old Ullevi, but it's the old, or is it called, basically, it means new Ullevi, but it's actually the old stadium. And then the new stadium is called the Old Ullevi. It's quite complicated.
Yeah, okay. Brilliant. So, well,
yeah,
we can't talk about...
just quickly on that, it's like a really old school sort of 80s stadium. It's really it's big, it's wide open, it creates a great atmosphere. It's grass, I think, which is that's quite different. Yeah, but their new stadium is called Old Ullevi. That's the literal translation of it, which is synthetic pitch and a bit more compact, lower attendance. But yeah, it's a really nice stadium to go to, actually. And but they won't be there for long. I think their next game will be back at the new stadium, or the old stadium as it's called.
because I did watch the highlights of that game, and I noticed the old running track around the pitch, and I thought I think I was partly daydreaming. Actually, I was like, that can't be the old stadium, can it? That explains it now. It explains it. So,
daydreaming there, Steve. You were bang on.
Yeah. So, well, actually, on the subject of stadium and fans, I know you want to talk about the attendances in this league at the moment, John, because they're on the up, aren't they?
They're indeed, and it's good news for the Allsvenskan in general and Swedish football. We had obviously in the pre-season podcast a bit of a debate about in Norway and Sweden whether the attendances are kind of, is the league on the up or down? And this is a positive sign that we've been told that the first two matches in Allsvenskan and Superettan combined had 220,000 spectators who witnessed 87 goals. But the increase in fans is a 10% increase compared to last season. So that's a positive trend upwards, and long may it continue.
Brilliant. I mean, that's good to hear, actually, the fans getting back in there. And I mean, I know we can't talk about every other team in Sweden at the moment. Is there any particular side that you want to finish off by talking about in this segment? I know that we did actually have a question from someone on Twitter who was inquiring about whether we could talk about Lynn and Djurgården. This is from Max Polk. I presume that's Lynn Oslo, Max, in Norway, but I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to talk much about them. They're in Division 3 now, and that isn't really my area. But maybe a quick word on Djurgården from you, John.
Djurgården, they have two of the highest scoring players in this week's Allsvenskan Fantasy League. Anyone in their team, anyone in the Nordic Football Podcast League who has our man Aslak Witry will be very, very happy indeed after he bagged 2 goals and a total of 38 points, I believe. And Marcus Danielsson also got 14 points there. So 2 players maybe for your fantasy team. But anyway, their underlying numbers are looking good. They're not conceding many. They're scoring a lot. A good 3-0 win. Örebro are quite poor. But no, they're going well. They're going well.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, we're back later to talk about...
wait, I haven't finished yet. Lynn Oslo, sorry, Steve. I still haven't forgotten John Obi Mikkel's transfer from Lynn Oslo to Manchester United. And anyone who remembers that 14 years ago, he held the shirt up with Man United. It was a done deal, and then some dodgy behaviours went on, and somehow a few days later he was in the Chelsea shirt. So that's pretty much my only memory of Lynn Oslo.
My memory of Lynn Oslo was there was hardly anyone ever watched their games. It was at they used to play at the Ulleval Stadium, joint with Vålerenga, and it just always felt that they never seemed to have many fans watch their games. But that was a long, long time ago now. They're in Division 3rd level, so good luck to them. But I don't know really what they're doing down there. In terms of my own expertise in the Norwegian leagues, then it really only extends to the Allsvenskan. To be honest with you, if you want to be looking below that, then
I remember they wore white shirts, and I didn't like them after that whole thing.
Well, before we move on to Norway, how about the Fantasy League, the Allsvenskan Fantasy League, that is? How's that been going?
Yeah, I mean, just before we move on, they sorry to dwell on this point, Steve, but there was an old saying. It was, don't believe that a player is signed for your team until you see them wearing the shirt. And I saw him with my own 2 eyes wearing the shirt, and ever since then, that particular phrase has been binned, after that one. So I don't know what happened there with Roman Abramovich and Chelsea, but I haven't forgotten you, Lynn Oslo. I have not forgotten you. In terms of fantasy football, yeah, a good week for a lot of people who've joined the league, and we've seen our league is growing. I think a lot more people have joined, and yeah, like I say, if you have Witry in your team, you've done very well. And I think obviously Linus Hellenius is scoring very well. And you asked me about him at 10.5 million during the pre-season podcast. I think his value will have gone up by now, but I might have to actually get in there because I haven't got him in my team. But yeah, there's quite a few interesting games this weekend. I think AIK Sirius is an interesting one. We're going to look at potential predictions later in part 2. But the games that stand out to me just on top of my head. I think ASE Eskilstuna Örebro will be an interesting game. I like the look of Falkenberg Häcken, and then Malmö Östersunds and Djurgården IFK are 2 big games.
All right, well, let's have a little bit of a break now, and after it, we will be talking about the Norwegian Eliteserien. So we'll catch you in a little bit.
Welcome to part 2 of this episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. So we're back after a very short break. I'm Jonathan Fadugba, and I'm joined by Steve Wyss, my Norwegian expert. And before we move on to the Norwegian League, just to cap off for you the league table in Sweden, we have Sirius at the top, Djurgården second, GIF Sundsvall, BK Häcken, and Östersunds in the top 5. Steve, moving on to Norway. And there we have Molde top, Viking second, Bodø Glimt in third, a team that we never ever talk about, Odd in 4th, and Strømsgodset in 5th there, tied with Lillestrøm and Brann. But I just wanted to say something quickly about Lyn Oslo, because I'm a bit upset about them still, and I won't let it go, Steve. Like the Murphys, I'm not bitter. But no, I'm just kidding. What are we going to say about Norway, Steve? Where are we going to say?
Well, we're going to have to start with Rosenborg, I think, because on the Twitter poll, that is what the listeners want us to talk about. So, yeah, 13th in the table at the moment. They've lost a match at Bodø Glimt and they've drawn a match against Odd. And I think it's fair to say in both games they were second best. Really, certainly in the first game they were absolutely they had the they were hammered really by Bodø Glimt. It could have been 3 or 4-0. It ended 2-0. I was very impressed with Bodø Glimt in that match, but Rosenborg were terrible. What's going wrong? The manager, Eirik Horneland, it doesn't feel like a good fit. I looked at a lot of the statistics last year because he was the Haugesund manager last year, and we were a team that had not much possession compared to the rest of the league. I think they were ranked lowest in that department, actually, certainly in the bottom 3. So you can tell what sort of style he was playing there, which was very effective for that sort of club. Can you really play that sort of style at a top club? You know, his natural way might not suit Rosenborg. That's my gut feeling. There was murmurs pre-season of players. Samuel Adegbenro, for example, who's actually injured at the moment. He said it was taking some adaptation to get used to the Horneland way, and that he was going to have to play with more discipline, more of a structured role, less of a sort of a wild card thing, allowed to do his own sort of creativity. And, that's all well and good, but I just think this Rosenborg team needs to be let off the leash a little bit more. And not too many players in this system seem to be enjoying it right now. Perhaps the only one that's looking somewhat decent is Paul-Andre Helland, the winger, who's a quality player at this level when he's fit. There's not enough players just looking like they're enjoying the system, looking like they're enjoying their football. They were booed off on Monday night against Odd. And I was looking at the Y-Scout stats for this game. And do you know what Rosenborg's expected goals in the second half were at home against Odd, John?
No idea.
0. They basically didn't have a sniff of a goal after half time. That's how shocking it is. Things aren't going well. They've got a really tricky looking match against Stabæk away in this round at the weekend. And at the moment, I'm not seeing an awful lot of signs of life, to be honest. I'm a bit concerned.
Yeah, and just to recap, those 2 games, they first lost to Bodø Glimt 2-0. Goals from Konradsen, which was a bit of a beauty, wasn't it, actually? Long ranger there. And Leuni. And we'll come on to Glimt later, because even me, they've caught my eye in the last 2 games. It looked like they played a 4-4-1-1 system in the first game, Steve, and then, couldn't beat Odd. 1-1 at home. So what's the problem? Is it a tactical shape? Have they changed it? What's the manager changed that's sort of led to this? Is it they're playing a different shape? Is it just personnel? Or
well, he completely got it wrong in that first game. He played with two deep midfielders, were Jermund Assen and Mike Jensen. All right, now Jensen can probably just about do that role, but Jermund Assen's an attacking midfielder or a winger. So to ask him to do, fill in a deep role in that match was just borderline suicidal, really. He got the team lineup. He had Bentner playing as like a central midfielder in the Bodø/Glimt match, which is ridiculous. He seems to have this idea of playing Nicholas Bentner as basically anywhere on the field apart from a striker.
As any taxi driver will tell you, you can't box Bentner in, can you? You can't put him in the back seat.
You certainly can't, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I think Horneland is one of them managers who seems to have his own favourites, if you know what I mean. And not all managers have this, but at the moment, I'm not convinced by his man management. I'm not convinced by his tactics. I said in the winter, they had all winter to bring in a top-class name and a top-class coach, and all they could do was bring in a guy from little old Haugesund. It just never with me.
You've been critical of him even in the pre-season podcast. And I mean, to be fair to him, he's got a big job there, and I don't know how well he's done at Haugesund, but we can't be too critical. I mean, he's earned his position there, Steve. But time will obviously tell. I mean, we've got a question from a listener who goes by the name of at Italia FPL, and his question is: have Rosenborg become bad, or is it their usual start of the season? And I think it's a good question. And looking back at their start to the season last year, and this wasn't under the manager that you're criticising here, I don't think, was it, Steve? They lost at Salzburg, and then they drew the next two games. Rosenborg 2-2 with Christiansen, and then they drew 1-1 with Odd. So the following game after that was a 4-0 win against Molde, and that's when the season really kick-started. So is this a usual pattern for Rosenborg? Do they normally tend to do this? And, what's your answer there to Italia FPL?
Yeah, thanks very much for your question there, Italia FPL, who also said, hey, great pod, can't wait for the new one. I can't either, mate. So, and a lot of other people can't wait for it either. So thanks very much for the kind words there. It's a good question because, Rosenborg have always been a slow starter, actually, in my opinion. Even, from when I first started covering this league a decade ago and longer, it always did. They had this reputation of not getting out of the blocks very quickly. And it didn't happen last season either, obviously. But this just feels different to me, John. It's just, in the past, they might have sort of not had the results early on, but played all right. And no need to panic because other teams up there are not that good. I think the problem for them this year is they've looked crap. They haven't played very well at all. And they're obviously, we're going to come to Molde in a minute, but it looks like Molde are for real this season. So they're facing a side that are looking very good. But yeah, it's not unusual for them to start slow and at all. So in terms of that, not a lot's changed, but it just feels different this time. It just feels like they're just not playing well enough.
Well, in fairness to their manager, then therefore they have shown slow starts in the past. So I'll try and balance out your criticism by just saying maybe he needs the time to settle that previous seasons have had in that sense. We're actually not going to move on to Molde now because we've been outvoted. And I personally voted for this team to talk about first, but Rosenborg won the poll. But the next team we're going to talk about, Steve, is Viking. And
yes,
we'll ask you to tell us about Viking and why are fans voting in their droves to discuss this particular newly promoted side.
Yeah, I'm a bit just surprised, I must admit, John. Obviously, I didn't think they're going to do great this year, but it's clear they've got a promotion bounce in them at the moment.
2 wins.
Yeah, 2-0 wins. They're the only team that have actually yet to concede a goal, which is even more shocking. I absolutely slammed their defence pre-season, didn't I? It's strange. They've obviously a few players have stood out. Certainly, the youngster Christian Thorstvedt, 20 years old. He's named in the Norwegian under-20 World Cup squad, which is taking place in June, I think, May or June. Anyway, you might know better than me about that competition.
In Poland, yeah.
So he's definitely a good talent to watch out for. He scored 2 goals against Tromsø at the weekend, and the old legend up front, Tommy Hurland. I don't think he's actually scored a goal yet, but he's obviously a big presence. The defence, I can't explain how a defence which was so poor in the Obos-ligaen has actually looked quite solid. I can't explain it. In goal, Ivan Uspo is a goalkeeper. I think he's a terrible keeper at this level, but he's actually looked somewhat competent so far, surprisingly. Fair play to him. He's not really been tested much either. So I think a lot of the credit has to be given to the back line. And some players that have stood out to me, Sondre Briochol, who had never actually played in the Eliteserien before this year, who's looked quite good at right back for them. Rune Hove has looked good at centre back. They've actually lost a player to injury for the whole season. He got injured 16 minutes into the first match. Axel Oskar Andresen. He's gone for the year with an ACL injury, so unlucky there. But guys are coming like Viljar Vevatna. And the 2 teams they faced, Kristiansund and Tromsø, are no mug, so it's not like they faced absolute sacks of shit here. I'm surprised. It's just one of those. Sometimes you can't explain it, But
should the keeper have saved the second goal against Viking? I mean, that was
of course.
The effort, but that's fairly central, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a poor error from a young. The young keeper at Tromsø, who I bigged up last week in the interview with Simo Valakari. But he's learning. The young keepers, you've got to give them a lot of time, haven't you? So, but yeah, Viking. I think the most impressive part has been their ability to keep it solid at the back. And look, let's see how they fare against some better teams offensively. But so far, so good for Viking.
Okay, fair enough. And from a fantasy point of view, just for the listeners there who have an interest in fantasy, any players that we should be looking at for our teams?
Well, I wouldn't. They've kept 2 clean sheets, but I'm not looking to the Viking defence because I think in the end it will. They will concede goals at this level. But I do like Zlatko Tripic, the winger. He's actually in my team, although he's got a bit of an injury doubt at the moment. He definitely caught my eye. And, this midfielder, youngster, Christian Thorstvedt, looks like a good sort of box-to-box sort of guy who can chip in with some goals here and there. So those would be the 2 players from Viking that I'd be looking at.
Interesting. And the next 2 games are... I think they've got Brann at home, Brann at home. And then
they are away.
So, yeah. 2 games, that'll be a tough test for them, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, we actually had a question about the Brann game from the Northman. Thanks very much for the question there. Who is based in Norway. He also asked us about a match in the 3rd tier.
Egersund's against Brian, I think. Could you tell us your predictions for that game, Steve?
Well, it's a huge local derby in the 3rd tier, apparently. And, derby matches are tight, aren't they, usually? So I'm going to say 0-0 there. But, yes, it's not really the sort of level that I'm an expert in, I'm afraid. But I certainly can talk about the Viking Brann game, which is another local battle. 2 teams, big rivalry with each other. And, Brann are probably quite pleased that the Viking are back in the league, so this fixture's on the board. Do you know what? I think it actually comes at a great time for Viking because Brann, this is their 3rd game in the space of a week. The defence of Brann is suddenly looking a bit dodgy. This momentum that Viking had, it would not surprise me at all if they got a win in this game or at least a draw. So, tricky one to predict, actually. I'd say probably, if I had to stick my neck out, I would say a 1-1 draw, a scoring draw. 1-1.
Brann, yeah? Against Brann.
Yeah, Viking against Brann.
Okay. Thanks for that, Steve. And the Northman, thanks for your question. Let's move on. I think it's about time we speak about this team, really. And they've certainly caught my eye, a couple of their players. Let's move on to Molde, your pre-season tip to win a title.
Yeah, got to move on to them. Well,
Question. Before you kick off there, we have a question which is, what is the chances that this is a golden age for Molde FK? from Richard R. Lockhaug. And his second question is, how good is Magnus Wolf Eikrem? But we'll come on to that. But yeah, Steve. Another question was also by @ThisIsLiam, and it kind of maybe carries on from that. Can Molde keep up this strong start, and will they win Sunday? So a lot of people have got questions about Molde. Steve, take it away.
Yeah, they definitely have. Is this a chance of a golden age for Molde? Well, the problem with any team in Norway is if it does really well, usually in the off season, bigger teams buy their top players. So it's almost actually a very hard question to answer, if I'm being brutally honest with you. However, in this instance, I do feel there is a chance for them to have a good sustained few years of success, because they don't really need the money at the moment, do they? They sold Erling Braut Haaland for £5 million. They've got about £1 million from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's move to Man United. And you know what? A lot of the players they've brought in they're not what you'd call really great up-and-coming youngsters who are going to move on like Haaland. They signed established Eliteserien players who are entering the prime sort of stages of their career in Norway. I mean, no disrespect to like Martin Bjørnbakk or Christopher Harald's side. At this point in time, I just don't see them really moving away from the Eliteserien to anywhere big. They'll quite happily be sort of bigwigs in the Eliteserien for many a year. Obviously, there was a few guys that could move on, like, you know, Ui eventually may well get that dream move to England. But, you know, even like Magnus Wolf Eikrem, who we're going to talk about in a minute, he's 29 now. And I think there's a chance that, this team could stay together for 2 or 3 years.
I think before we move on to sort of talking about dynasties, I mean, let's bear in mind, let's put things in perspective, Steve. We're 3 games into the league. They have a game in hand, and they haven't actually won all their games. They drew their opening game, didn't they? So I think we should take this, maybe not get too carried away with ourselves. Or are you really that high on them? I mean, looking at their underlying stats, they're not even in the top 5 for expected goals against. So, you know.
Well, I don't see from here how they're not going to win the league unless Rosenborg suddenly become really strong. It's just Molde are head and shoulders above the rest at the moment in terms of squad, the way they're playing. On the opening day draw at Sarpsborg was actually what you'd say a draw of champions almost, where they're outplayed for a large majority of the game but equalised late. And then they've looked very, very comfortable in the 2 home wins against Stabæk and Vålerenga. Their control of the game is what's impressed me the most. They're keeping the ball really well. They're waiting patiently for big chances. There seems to be a great chemistry and connection between the players, especially this Magnus Wolf to Ui sort of connection at the moment is looking very good. And so is Arik Hestad, who's had a great start to the season. They reinforced in the right areas. And what was the question? How are they going to get on this weekend against Bodø Glimt? Well, that's actually a really interesting...
Yeah, actually, before you come on to answering that, let's talk about Bodø Glimt, because for me, they're the team who've probably caught my eye more than anybody. Partly because of that 5-4, thrilling game, which even got picked up by BBC Match of the Day online for the incredible end to it. Just run us through that game quickly, Steve, and then obviously Glimt's form so far before we answer that, prediction for the weekend.
Well, what we got? How long have we got? It's a lot to talk about.
2 minutes.
But 5-4 against Mjøndalen. Bodø Glimt took a 2-0 lead in that game. Mjøndalen came back to score 3 goals, all from set pieces. Bodø Glimt retook the lead with 2 goals, and then unfortunately the goalkeeper for Bodø Glimt got injured. It was a bad concussion in the 89th minute, and he had to go off the field. They used all their substitutions up, so they ended the game with Vegard Moberg in goal for them. 11 minutes of stoppage time was added to this game, and Mjøndalen actually equalised in about the 97th minute, I think. It was a header. The goalkeeper could have done nothing about that one. And, it looked like it was going to be a ridiculous 4-4 draw, which I think would have been a fair result, really. But then an incredible winning goal in the 101st minute from Hakon Evjen, who we have talked a little bit about in this podcast before. And the first man to mention it was actually Tom Dent in the interview with him last year, who did say that this is a young kid to watch out for long term. And by gum, he's absolutely right that, he's a young winger, 19-year-old. He's another one in the Norwegian under-20 World Cup squad, I do believe, already confirmed. And what a sweet hit with his left foot. It may well become the goal of the season in Norway. Who knows? It's a big contender. And, great start for Glimt. They've looked really great offensively, In terms of expected goals, I'm sure they're right up there at the moment. And so impressive how they beat Rosenborg. And, the Mjøndalen game, it was wild. But they're really looking good offensively right now, Glimt.
Yeah, one for potential fantasy team players there. Konradsen has 2 goals for Bodø Glimt, a 22-year-old. He's doing very well. And also, Andre Herum has got 2 goals, hasn't he? So those are 2 players maybe for people who are playing fantasy football. Take it away, Steve. Let's hear your prediction for Molde against Bodø Glimt, because they seem to be 2 informed teams, 2 teams to watch. I think sounds like it'll be a good game, won't it?
2-2 draw for me. I think there'll be goals in this game, so if you want to bet on it, then I'd go on the overs. But at the moment, obviously, I'm very high on Molde, but I'm also quite respectful of Bodø Glimt. They're in a great phase at the moment, and I don't think they'll fear Molde at all. So it's a real tough game for the visitors here, especially it's their 3rd one in a week, and I could see them being tested. But Molde have got enough about them here to get some sort of a result. I don't necessarily think they'll win, though. Bodø Glimt cannot be underestimated this weekend.
Do not underestimate Bodø Glimt. Music to Tom Dent's ears, and perhaps a bit of loud rush hour heavy traffic to the ears of Sima Valkari and any Tromsø fans there. We're going to move on now, and we're going to look at a team who has a player with the highest number of expected goals and assists in this league. Can you guess who I'm talking about, Steve?
Highest number of expected goals and assists?
Yep. I'm going to give you 5 seconds.
No, I don't know then. Go on.
Mathias Wilhelmsson of Vålerenga with 2.24. We're going to move on to them. We've had a few questions there, and they're a team to talk about. They also have the highest expected goals in the league, according to Y-Scout data. So let's hear your take on Vålerenga. You've written down here on your notepad, inconsistency.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rant, actually, I'm going to have about them again, because they're so frustrating, this team. They were brilliant on the opening day against Mjøndalen, as you would expect them to be. That's a match a lot of people would think, yeah, they're going to win that easily. But it wasn't. The way they won it was very impressive. It could have been 3 or 4, 5-0, and Williamson had a really great game. But then they follow that up with an absolute stinker of a performance at Kristiansund. And it's just they just look so poor in that game, John. They were reduced to 10 men. The Mexican Juarez got a bad tackle on Gjertsen. It was described as a pig's tackle by one pundit on the Eurosport Norway. But it really, that just summed up Vålerenga in the last, under Ronny Deila for me. They have a great performance, and they back it up with a terrible one. And, the Molde match, they were not in the game for about an hour, and then they finally got a goal back, and they started to play again. It's in there. I think they're weak mentally, It's just they don't have that, they don't have the bollocks sometimes, They're a disappointment in that regard, but the potential and quality's there, John. It's like a tap. They'll turn it on and off when they want to, I think. Very hard to predict.
There you go from Meatman Soccer, and a bit of a damning indictment on them, but they have the highest expected goals in the league. So, maybe it's stats versus what you see with your eyes at times. Interesting analysis from you there, Steve. Ball possession, they are 54%, so top 5, but they're 10th in the table. 3 games played, and let's see how things go with them. I think we're going to move on now, unless you've got anything else to say about Vålerenga, or is that your rant over?
That's it. I've got enough. No more about them.
You had enough of them?
Yeah.
Okay, we're moving on quicker than Ronny Deila pulls his pants down when things go well. let's talk about long throws, because you've got a bit of a rant here, which you already had on Twitter, but I'm going to give you 20 seconds to get out this rant from your system. It's the rant cast here. Get it all out.
This is regarding a match, Haugesund against Sarpsborg at the weekend, and it was like a duel of long throws. Nikolai Ness of Sarpsborg, Alexander Sturlas of Haugesund. And it was like every single time in the final third there was a throw-in, the teams resorted to this long throw tactic. And the faffing about, getting everyone ready for it, it takes so much time out of the game. It's absolutely tedious. In terms of the neutral watching it, I nearly turned it off. It was just pathetic. And these teams are not terrible sides either. They've got technical quality players in there. They don't have to resort to a long throw every single time. They weren't mixing it up or anything. And it just got ridiculously tedious. The amount of dead time in the match was nearly 55 minutes. Now, there's usually quite a lot of dead time in any game anyway. Around, I think, 40 minutes is the average. But to say that the amount of football actually played was only about 35 minutes, it's pathetic. And it was, I reckon, a lot of it was because of these long throws, which were taking forever, absolutely forever, to get everyone lined up for it. And look,
so you're happy about the long throws?
No, I'm not happy about them. I don't like long throws anyway.
I've got some bad news for you, I'm afraid. And that is because you had your rant on Twitter at Nordic Foot Pod as well about this. And, you made a call to arms and you've asked everyone if they love long throws, hate them with a passion, or it should be mixed up. And I'm not joking here. This is a 5 tweet rant by @MeatmanSoccer at Nordic Foot Pod at 2:29 p.m. in the afternoon. So you've been brewing this one up for a while. But unfortunately, the verdict is in, and the verdict is 44% say they love long throws. I'm afraid to say, @MeatmanSoccer, you've been outvoted there.
Well, we obviously know Tony Pulis follows us on Twitter, don't we? Obviously, for that.
There's rumours unconfirmed rumours he created 2 accounts actually to vote twice. But he also asked Rory Delap to create 3 accounts. So these rumours are unconfirmed. The verdict's in anyway. If you love long throws, follow us at Nordic Football on Twitter. At @MeatmanSoccer definitely doesn't. So if you agree with him, then give him a tweet himself, and he might be happy to hear that, seeing as he voted for hate them with a passion. But we're going to move on now to fantasy football and a couple of predictions for this weekend. Let's look at the weekend ahead. Just to wrap up on Vålerenga, by the way, their first 2-3 games then, I guess, they've lost. Well, they won at home to Mjøndalen, lost at Kristiansand, and lost 4-1 at Molde. So looking ahead, Steve, who we got for your fantasy team? We had a question from a listener who says, captain options for game week 3. And that's from Neil Baxter. He wants to know.
Thanks very much for that, Neil. And I've been doing some videos on the YouTube channel, the Nordic Football Podcast. Subscribe to us on that channel, by the way. Well worth subscribing to. About fantasy advice. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that this week, unfortunately, with the first match being on a Friday. So you're just going to have to listen to this podcast for advice only. I mean, the captain I'm having every single week is Magnus Wolf Eikrem, the Wolf. He's so reliable, consistent that he can, against any team, he can produce a moment of magic and get points from nowhere. So if he's fully fit, he's my captain at the moment, no doubt about it. But other potential captain options could be, look, Ui himself is in great goal-scoring form. Williamson, he's got a good matchup against Tromsø. And, you can never go too far wrong with someone like Vito Vermgaard as a captain at Brann in case they get a penalty. But, I'd be going with the Wolf as my captain in Norway. I mean, what about Sweden? Is there any obvious, real standout captain material there?
Well, firstly, just to recap there. So, Neil, if you're listening, Mr. Steve Wyss has gone for Magnus Wolf Eikrem, who they play on Sunday at Bodø Glimt, 5 p.m. UK time. Looking at Sweden, it's a good question, actually. I haven't really thought about this too much. I'm a little bit upset because I'm not top of the Nordic Football Podcast League. and I didn't have Witchery in my team, so I'm going to have to up my game at this rate. I'm looking at a couple of games. I think AIK is serious. I think you've got probably a banker clean sheet there for AIK, but Sirius have been known to give me a bit of a slap around the face every time I make a prediction. So don't put your house on it. But yeah, I'm looking personally at Daniel Sundgren as my potential captain. I think they'll keep a clean sheet, and I think he could potentially get involved somehow in the scoring ranks. Alternatively, yeah, and if you're looking for an outsider in your team, maybe as opposed to Sundgren, maybe not for your captain, but an outside player, maybe who's not owned by many people. In fact, only just 6.4% of people. I would suggest Mamadou Moro of Helsingborg. He's 6.1 million. He's already got 14 points, so he's the fourth top scorer in the league. He's bagged an assist and a goal, and a couple of bonus points as well, I believe. And yeah, I think he's got a little bit of potential there. So if you're looking for outsiders, as I like to do, then he might be one to consider. On a personal note, I'm pretty close to dumping Ravel Morrison already because he's not doing much for me. So I'll be keeping an eye on him and Romain Gall in my team, and maybe looking to someone like Morrow to potentially replace them. But yeah, I think AIK are the team you'd probably look at for this round. Maybe as another outsider, maybe Linus Hellenius, not an outsider, but as a captain option, maybe Linus Hellenius. They've got Elfsborg away, as I've said before. I don't rate Elfsborg. He might bag a few more. He's got 21 goals now in 3 match days this season and the whole of last season, so he's absolutely flying.
Yeah, I've had that Chartenson as my captain both weeks for Hammarby, but he's done absolutely wank all. Missed some sitters, I think, hasn't he? So I'm debating about I'm going to keep him, but whether I'm not keeping him as captain, I don't know.
You make me laugh, Steve. You make me laugh. Yeah. Now turn a phrase there. So before we leave, we've got a couple of bets as well. We've had a few people asking us for our predictions. We've got a few right, haven't we? We had Jeff Good, Jurgen to beat Audible at 1.95. You've had a few winners as well, haven't you?
Yeah, we've been asked by Salola, our good old friend Salola, for these betting tips. And so, well, here's some from me for Norway for this week. Give you 4 to get your teeth stuck into. I've already mentioned Bodø Glimt against Molde. Over 2.75 goals. Or over 2.5, you could take. Mjøndalen against Strømsgodset on Friday night. I think that's another over 2.75. It should be a match full of goals. I think Odd should beat Kristiansand on Sunday. And I think Sarpsborg will beat Lillestrøm on Sunday. So they're my 4.
4 tips for you there. Mjøndalen v Strømsgodset over 2.5. Odd win. Sarpsborg win. Bodø Glimt Molde over 2.75. I am going for one game in particular that stands out for me. I think Malmö against Östersunds. My theory here is, as I've mentioned, the underlying stats for Östersunds are looking a little bit weak. I think Malmö have got the highest expected goals in this division, according to Y-Scout data, and I think they might be due for their first win of the season. So, although they're not doing that much to impress me, I'm going to go for an Malmö win against Östersunds on Sunday, 4:30 kickoff. And I'm also going to say overs in that game. I think there'll be more than 2.5 goals. And then my other tip for this week is give Sundsvall away to Elfsborg. I've got them to beat Elfsborg away, which is on Sunday at 2 p.m.
Brilliant. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up this podcast, doesn't it, John? Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. And, well, we'll be back again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, of course, we will be back again soon. And don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at Nordic Foot Pod, and give us a like on Facebook, Nordic Football Podcast. I've got a few other things to tell you about, a few poster boards. Number 1, we are now on SoundCloud. So if you're on SoundCloud, get involved. We are also on Spotify. So if you're on Spotify, subscribe and get involved. And as well as this, and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, we have partnered with Y-Scout, as you've probably heard us mention a few times. And our first blog there for them has been published by our good friend Steve. He has written a great piece on 5 players to watch this season in the Eliteserien, using a lot of statistical data. to cement his place as the #1 analyst on this league. And so go check it out. We'll be writing for Wyscout probably on a regular basis now this season, giving you more and more detailed analysis of Sweden and Norway. So come to us if you've got questions, tweet us, give us a like, a follow, all that goodness. And go and look at the archives as well. Sima Valakari, a great podcast last week, the Tromsø manager, and we're going to have a few more special guests coming and plenty more fantasy tips. My aim this week is to knock Steve off his perch. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye. See you again soon.